Hello and welcome to the Soulful Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Lucina Stepanyan. The purpose of this podcast is to get into the minds and the souls of entrepreneurs and to peek into their inner processes that result in multi-million-dollar enterprises. You can treat this podcast as a mini therapy session with entrepreneurs to learn about their brilliant minds and souls. Today's guest is an inspiring social entrepreneur who exudes confidence and inner strength. A real example of true power and leadership, the founder of Teach for Armenia, Larisa Hovannisian. Welcome, Larisa. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Larisa, we had a conversation before this, and I learned that you moved to Armenia about 10 years ago or so, maybe more than that. I wanted to talk a bit about the time leading up to you making the move and coming to Armenia, and a little bit about your time in the US right before you came, and what was this decision or the driver that pushed you to make the decision to move to Armenia?
Yeah, I've been in Armenia for over 10 years now. I've always had a connection to Armenia. My mother is Armenian from Yerevan. Her roots go back to Artsakh, but my father is not Armenian. He's American, and I grew up between multiple countries, and my formative years were in Russia. My college was in the US, but every summer I spent in Yerevan with my wonderful grandmother, who was a longtime professor of pedagogy and philosophy at Brusov University, which is a state university here in Yerevan. And, growing up in Russia, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, wasn't the greatest place for a kid to grow up. And so my time in Yerevan was really what made my childhood great. And so my mother strategically brought me and my sister to Yerevan every summer, and that's where I really learned to be Armenian. It wasn't a direct sort of forceful, you're Armenian and therefore you should know and do these things. It was just, a love that sort of grew within me and within my sister, just purely because of our grandmother and the people that we knew here and loved here and who loved us. And so Armenia became home. And I sort of felt like the 9 months of the academic year that I would spend in Moscow with my parents was sort of like a boarding school. And then, although my parents were there with me, but Armenia was really where I felt at home, and I deeply began to connect with the country. Obviously, it started with childhood memories and just being a kid playing outside in the Buk and having great friends and freedom that I didn't have when growing up in Moscow. And then eventually, I would grow up and sort of understand the kind of family I came from and who my grandmother was professionally and who my grandfather was. I began to also understand that there was another dimension to me and to who I was because of our Artsakh connection and the fact that my grandfather was a well-known writer at the time, writing about Artsakh, writing about Armenia. He was a journalist for a big news publication in Russia called Izvestia. He worked against the system, against the grain. He wasn't loved too much by the Communist Party. And so, as I sort of grew and began to more deeply understand my identity here in Armenia, the more I just understood that my future is somehow tied to this country. I just didn't understand, at that time, what that meant and what that would look like. I had this notion that, and I sort of saw that in practice, that I would grow up to be wealthy and have a business or work in a large corporation and make millions of dollars. And then I would do a philanthropic project in Armenia. And that would be my contribution to the country. And then as I was wrapping up my college years in Wisconsin, which is where my father is from, I was intending to have, as I said, a career in the corporate world. I studied marketing, international business, graphic design, French. I thought that I would go into, that kind of world. And then a few things happened in my last year of college. In the last few years of college, actually, as part of my international business course, I was asked to, all of the students had to essentially operate a nonprofit store, sort of sourcing and then selling for profit merch, various trinkets and souvenirs from all over the world. And then, so we had like a physical store that we had to run and we were responsible for. And then the profits we'd have to donate to other nonprofits in the community. And as a team, we would decide what organization that would be. And so that sort of initiated a love in me towards something that I didn't really know how to like put a name to it, because social impact, social enterprises, that was sort of like a very new thing at the time. But I just knew that business for good was something that felt really great to me. Another thing that happened was that one of my closest friends in college, who was a year older than me, got accepted into a program called Teach for America that I had not heard about. And the program recruited high achieving graduating students from universities, and would send them to work in under-resourced schools across the country for a period of 2 years. And it was a national service kind of program. And I went to visit her in Hawaii while she was teaching there, and I fell in love with what she was doing. And the third thing that happened was the financial crisis in America, that really created major barriers to young professionals and graduates when it came to getting a job. And so all of these things sort of conflated into one big worry, concern, question. Who am I? What am I supposed to do? What is my purpose? I kind of already started realizing that just working the corporate ladder wasn't something that I really wanted to do. I didn't know what the alternative was, so I decided to give myself time, which was probably the most important thing that I've ever done for myself. And of course, some people take a gap year or a leap year and they go traveling. I did a little bit of that for a few months, but then I applied to Teach for America, and just like my friend, and I didn't think that I'd get selected. I was a good student, but I was not as good as my friend. But I got selected that year. 55,000 people applied to join Teach for America, and about 5,000 people were selected, and I was luckily one of those people. And I got placed to teach in Phoenix, Arizona. Actually, Glendale, Arizona, which I thought was funny because, as you know, the destiny of most Armenians, it seems, has to do with a city named Glendale. And so I spent 2 years working in a classroom and sort of reassessing, my priorities in life. I mean, it was a fundamentally sort of shifting kind of experience working in a community that didn't have much, but I was in a school where most parents really valued, teachers and their contribution. And so it was a hard 2 years. I taught special ed, but it was a very, a cliche, I'm going to say, but a very life-changing experience, and obviously set me on a completely new trajectory. And then the voice of my mother throughout the 2 years in my classroom, who was spending her time between California and Armenia, and saying that, Armenia needs teachers like me. And so that all kind of morphed into this idea of, why don't we start something like Teach for America in Armenia? There are, I know, a lot of people who are talented and smart and love Armenia and understand why it's important to contribute to Armenia's development through education. And that really, it's probably one of the more important ways that you can actually change something for Armenia's future. So I gathered my stuff, I sold my car, and I moved from Arizona to Armenia with a business plan. I finally put my business degree to good use. And my mother had already moved to Armenia by then. I, like a typical millennial, went back to live with my mother at the age of 23 and started this whole journey with the founding of Teach for Armenia. So, and ever since then, I've been in Armenia, and I feel very lucky that I'm here.
Wow, this is amazing. I got goosebumps as you were speaking, especially at the part when you said, I didn't know who I was, and you were searching for purpose, essentially, I guess. Would you say that you found your purpose in Teach for Armenia?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think finding your purpose is also an evolution of thought, and you sort of need to give yourself the freedom to explore what that evolution is, and sort of not constrain yourself to I'm just this. You know, I am Teach for Armenia, and it's probably the most important body of work that I've created thus far. Who knows where I go next, but I know what my values are. I understand what's important to me. And I've also just understood over the course of these years where I want to be investing my time and efforts into, because there's a lot of different things that you can do. And I just feel lucky that I know what that is, even if it's not necessarily only like in the realm of Teach for Armenia and the work that I do with the organization. I think social impact, making people's lives better, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, these are all things that I think will stay, these values will stay with me until the end. And I think by allowing myself to innovate within Teach for Armenia and outside of Teach for Armenia, I've also been able to then evolve my own understanding of who I am and what my purpose is in life.
Yes. And would you say this was a journey of understanding yourself at the time when you gave yourself time to understand who you are and where you want to go? What was this process like, understanding who I am? You've realized you don't want to go the corporate route. So what is the alternative? A lot of people, I think you are lucky, because a lot of people struggle with finding themselves even in their 30s and 40s and then sometimes 50s, which unfortunately sometimes can be a bit late in life. And when you find it in your 20s, it opens up so many opportunities. What was this process like for you? Can you speak a bit more about like this understanding who you are, search for that?
Yeah. I don't think it's a structured process, to be honest. I think it's just a constant cycle of reflection and just being with yourself. And I think that may look very different for different people. For me, it looked like not rushing into the next thing just because that's what is commonly, perceived as like the next step by society. It was taking myself out of the comfort zone. That was important. Doing a program like Teach for America definitely takes you out of your comfort zone in many ways. It was an ongoing conversation within myself about, am I feeling good about this? Am I fulfilled? Is this something that, 40 years down the line, am I going to be happy that I did this? Or am I going to be like upset that I spent so much time on it? And sometimes you make mistakes, and sometimes you make the right choices. And I think kind of giving it time and trusting the process is very important. Often I see younger people be like, I need to figure out what my purpose is like tomorrow. I don't think it works that way. I think it's giving yourself experiences and allowing yourself these experiences, kind of trusting your gut, trusting your instinct, because our bodies like tell us whether we're in the right room, whether we're in the right conversation, whether we're in the right work, just like not over intellectualizing a lot of things. And just, again, trusting that life is taking you in the right direction, being open to it, but then also just building in time to reflect, pause and reflect and like say, okay, yeah, this feels right. Okay, like I'm going to try this next, and just letting it be like a flexible, agile kind of process, I think also takes the pressure off of younger people needing to like have it all figured out in terms of their purpose. Often I've seen, before it was like, what's your career? Like, which, are you applying to law school? Are you applying to med school? Like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And now with this generation, it almost feels like the career has been substituted with the life purpose. And I also think that that's not necessarily healthy. So yeah, being kind to yourself and loving yourself through the process, I think is really important. Yeah, I mean, that's worked for me so far. And I also understand that maybe the next time we have this conversation, I might give you a slightly different answer, and I think that's fine, yeah.
I like that. And I think you will give me a different answer next time because you are evolving. If you give me the same answer 10 years from now, 5 years from now, it means you are somewhat maybe stuck in the same loop and are not learning and you're not growing. Giving yourself time means you are drawing strength from somewhere. You're believing in yourself, your inner strength, your capabilities, but you are taking this strength from somewhere. Where did you find your strength to actually step back from the process and say, I'm going to take a minute, I'm going to figure out who I am, I'm going to figure out what am I doing with my life?
I can't say that it was like a fully idealistic decision. I mean, it was in a way pragmatic also, because I mentioned a few factors. I also made a calculated sort of decision that during the financial crisis, I'm probably not going to get the job that I've been working towards for so many years. So I might as well just assess the opportunities I have right now. I'm very drawn to social impact. So I want to maybe, not do the master's degree right away or not go into the corporate world right away. Yes, that was part of the plan, but it's okay that it's not going to be part of the plan right now, at least for now. Maybe there's a pause. Sort of allowing yourself time and maybe even like the courage to say, okay, like, yes, all these years that plan made sense, but right now all of these objective, subjective factors have taken place, and therefore I need to assess and think what's next. I think it was just like a balance of both pragmatism and courage and like kind of risk, I guess, so, but like that was, I knew I wanted to do something that would also be useful. There are people who want to do something completely different. They might just want to go traveling. They might, do something completely different, but I knew that I wanted to be useful. So, because that's one of my like priorities in life. It's one of my values that I knew about myself. So yeah, but again, I think often young people, because of social pressures, because of family, like there's like this anticipation of what your life or your journey needs to look like. And I think as long as you are safe and smart about the choices that you're making, and they feel true to who you are and to your values and align ultimately with what you think at that time is your purpose and the contribution and the legacy that you're supposed to leave behind in this world, then I say just go for it.
Beautiful. We'll get back to that a bit later as well. I want to talk a bit about your time in Armenia. Obviously, you spent your time in Russia and then in the US. So coming to Armenia, what was this transition period like? Was this a difficult, was there a culture shock involved, or was it a difficult period for you? It was fairly easy. Yeah.
It was tough, definitely, for multiple reasons. One of the reasons was I did not speak the language very well. So my level of Armenian was just the Armenian you need to use to get by talking to your friends, when you're playing outside with them. I've always been fluent in Russian, and sort of mixing the two got me through my summers just fine here as a kid. So I just never, I just never learned Armenian. And in my family, we'd either speak English with my father. My father's also fluent in Russian, or we'd speak Russian to my mom because she grew up Russian speaking. And so, yeah, I mean, not knowing the letters, not knowing how to read or write, not knowing more literary Armenian was a really big challenge. On top of that, being a diasporan, or being perceived to be a diasporan, young, 24-year-old woman, was not, isn't like the ingredients you're looking for if you want to start off a little bit easier. So, and in the beginning, I am very like justice oriented, like everything has to be just, and this is unfair, and justice. And so I would just like sort of exert so much energy into every single conversation and every single situation. And there were so many, obviously, when you start something from scratch, there are so many situations. And I was just like exhausted. Like in Armenian, we say mashvats. Like I was just like so exhausted, because I would just spend a lot of my energy fighting for justice in every single, interaction that I had. Whether it was because I felt like my rights were violated as a woman, or I felt like people were being ageist, or I felt like people were not being nice to me because I didn't, I was perceived as a diasporan, and all these other things. And then, like you grow up kind of, and your work begins to grow in scale and in volume and in complexity, and you sort of realize that you only have so much energy, and you have to sort of protect it so that you can invest it into battles that are actually worth fighting. And so I learned that the hard way. I definitely burnt out a few times throughout the years, but I eventually have now come to a point where, and this is like 10 years in, I can't say I'm like a very fast learner, but better better late than never. Yeah, I feel like I know what to fight for and what to just sort of let go. And my life has been significantly better once I sort of learned how to do that.
But I want to touch on the point you mentioned that obviously 10 years ago and now it's quite different, but the treatment towards women at the workplace, or women leaders, what was it like before, and how has that evolved throughout time?
I think, first of all, it's just important to note that Yerevan is a sort of bubble. And even within this bubble, there are massive challenges when it comes to how women are perceived in the workplace. But when I remember where we were 10 years ago and where we are now, it's, definitely better. It's significantly better, purely because there are many more women in positions of power. And whereas before it was kind of weird, like if you were a female entrepreneur, like you would still be successful, but it was just like there wasn't enough of it happening for people to just be like, okay, like, yeah, she's not a female entrepreneur, she's just an entrepreneur, right? So it's definitely better. I mean, it's different in the regions, obviously, but I'm seeing more and more women, kind of take on to important roles within regional government, for example. Or I was in a meeting recently in one of our partner regions, and of course, most of the village mayors were men, like 95% of them, but there were some women village mayors, which was not the case, to my knowledge, 10 years ago. It's very rare. So there's progress. But I've always sort of felt, even though, I mean, I've been affected by some of this stuff, and I used to take it super close to heart before, now I definitely don't. It's important, I think, and I had always thought this, that when we have conversations around gender imbalances and, how women are perceived and treated and all these other things, it's important to have these conversations in a way that are all encompassing and actually bring men into the conversation. I've always had a problem with panels that are like female entrepreneur panel. No, I want to be on a panel with whoever is there based on merit, because these are the best people in the industry, or they're doing the most interesting things in the country. And if it happens to be, women who are on the panel majority, that's great. I don't want to be singled out. I'm just an entrepreneur. And I happen to be a woman, and I'm so happy that I'm a woman, I've felt that not just in Armenia, but I think in the world, like there was this siloing a little bit, and I never think that's productive. I think like you want to talk to people who maybe don't think like you, who have a different opinion, who might challenge you. I don't think we should be scared of that. I think we want to have these kinds of debates, and we want to have these kinds of challenging conversations. So I'm seeing more of that now. Like before it was, siloed and women talking to women and men talking to each other. And now I feel like there's much less of that, which I'm very, very happy about.
Yeah, I agree. And we had a very exactly similar conversation with Larisa Hovannisian a couple of days ago. And as we were choosing guests for the podcast, we specifically made the conscious decision of not choosing a guest because she's a female entrepreneur, but based on merit, not just because she's a female. And this really resonated with me as, yes, exactly. That's how it should be, because there are so many amazing female entrepreneurs who are just entrepreneurs, and they don't have to be singled out because they are female, but because they're great entrepreneurs. So
yeah, because I just felt like with that terminology, it sort of made me feel like my intelligence and my talent is undermined. It's like I am there because I deserve to be there, because I built something of value, because I've built something that's impactful, not because I'm a female. Anyway, I can go on and on about this topic, but I'm just happy to report from Armenia that things are better now, but we still have a long way to go. If you look at our government, it's always been like this, and not to politicize the conversation, but most of our ministers are men. and most of our deputy ministers are women.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But that is the sad reality, but at least we're moving in a direction where there are more women involved in the conversations. And I agree, we shouldn't single out female or versus male. But then again, at some point, we need to start conversations involving women and men. And then at some point, it will organically morph into something where it doesn't matter what gender you are. You're a professional at the workplace.
Exactly. And just a final sort of thought on this. When I started Teach for Armenia, a lot of my work, obviously we're in the regions, we work in the regions. And I had to talk to really different people from different walks of life, primarily men who were, leaders of communities or of schools or of regional governments. And, I shake people's hands when I meet them for a professional meeting, and Armenian professional men don't shake the hands of women very often. Of course, that has changed also, but when I was starting over 10 years ago, it was very bizarre. Like I would sort of extend my hand for a shake, and the man who was, let's say, the head of a village would be very weirded out by that, because that's just not a customary sort of thing. And so I would just be super authentic. I'd say, you know what? I really want you to shake my hand. Like, it would mean so much to me if you shook my hand. And they'd say, of course, no problem. I'll shake your hand. I'd love to shake your hand. So I think often it's just like talking through like expectations and what you would like in a professional setting and how you would like to be treated in a professional setting, and creating the boundaries, not because you're trying to protect yourself necessarily, but because you're sort of trying to set up the rules, right? As a woman. And so that's worked really well for me. And I've honestly have not, of course I've experienced some, pretty tough things, but, in terms of like misogyny and like stuff like that. But like in general, I feel like when you're authentic, when you're kind, when you're honest, people receive that really well, even if they're not used to that whatsoever. So I've had a very positive experience sort of learning over the last 10 years.
I love that. And I think it's on us. It's our responsibility to actually set the rules, set the tone, and teach people how you want to be treated, because they are not used to it. It's not, we can't blame someone in the region who is going on a meeting, a male, who is going on a meeting with a female and being a bit weirded out, as you said, by that. We can't blame them because it's not the norm. But we can take it as not an offense, but this is a learning and teaching opportunity here, and then set the rules. And next time he meets a woman, he will treat her differently, because he will know, well, I met Larisa, she's amazing, she's a professional, and I'm sure this woman is not going to be different, or that's going to be the norm within the next few years, which I think that's what's happening, because women like you are taking the responsibility to set the tone, as opposed to conforming to the rules and norms that already are in place. I love that. I wanted to switch gears a bit and talk about something we discussed in our conversation prior to the recording, which is imposter syndrome. And I'm sure it's kind of related to what we've just been talking about. Have you felt, as you were starting out, even now, have you experienced imposter syndrome? And I'll explain what that means just for the sake of the listeners as well. It's this feeling when you are sort of, you think you're a fraud, despite your position of success potentially. You feel like you don't match that. Have you ever experienced that, and how do you deal with it? How do you overcome that feeling?
I think, every entrepreneur goes through a learning curve, and I think in the beginning it's super steep. And I think often you might, you're early in your career, you're doing it for the first time. A lot of the people you're working with sometimes might be way more experienced than you, older than you, have more years on you, and I used to think that that was imposter syndrome, but I actually don't think it is. I think it's just objectively, you're younger, you're less experienced, you might know less, but you have the idea. And I think that's the kind of realization I came to, thankfully, pretty early into all of this work. Because doing this work and living with the imposter syndrome is, I think, a recipe for complete burnout and collapse that obviously affects the organization. I think anyone who starts off, whether they're older or they are younger, if it's a new thing, if it's a new company, you kind of, fake it till you make it. I don't know. Again, it's not because you're the wrong person for the role. I think it's just because you just are doing this for the first time and you haven't learned all the things you need to learn yet. Neither do I think that learning stops. I think it's just something that continues. And if you know that, and if you understand that there isn't ever probably going to be a time where you're like, yep, I've learned all the lessons. I know all of the ins and outs of this. If you don't have that moment, like if you don't think that that's ever going to happen for you because you're on a constant learning journey, then I think, you're probably not going to experience the syndrome because you just know that you're constantly evolving, constantly learning. And yes, there's always going to be someone who knows more, who's smarter, who is more experienced, and that's just the way life is. I think the doubts that I had about myself kind of went out the window with the pandemic, to be very honest, because I just realized that like no one actually knows what they're doing. Even like the biggest companies or like the most known politicians, you kind of see people like scrambling to figure things out and adapting along the way, and it kind of enabled me, even within just Teach for Armenia, to like let go of like the self-imposed constraints that we've had and just innovate and try things because, if it fails, it fails, and if it succeeds, it succeeds. And clearly, like when these kinds of global things happen, like people have no idea what to do. So that's okay. Like there isn't actually this like major, sort of structure that sort of governs everything. It's like people just figure it out along the way and adapt. And I think that whole thing kind of, made me worry less about the things that I don't know and kind of embrace the things that I do and be very open about where I am in the process and not need to constantly compete with someone else. I just am who I am and I know what I know, and these are my limitations and these are my strengths and these are the things that I'm working on, and that's it. Like openly talk about that and always refer to the fact that you're in a constant process of learning and getting better. And I feel like when you even articulate that to your enemy or to like your opponent or to the person who's challenging you, you disarm them completely because they think they have this thing on you where I'm smarter, I know more, I know this theory, you don't know this theory. It's like, okay, that's fine. I'm learning it. I'll learn it too. I'm pretty smart. But yeah, you're ahead of me in this way. I don't think like competing with others, obviously the syndrome also is a complex of, like what you know versus what the other person knows. It's a sort of competitive like assessment. that you impose on yourself with someone else. And I think, like, as you sort of evolve, you realize that you shouldn't really be competing with someone else. You should just be competing with yourself. And, can you be a better version of you, a stronger version of you, a smarter version of you tomorrow or in 3 months or in a year? That's the only sort of competitive streak that I've allowed myself to continue having. I think it's healthy for growth. But when it comes to other people, other organizations, I just don't have that anymore. I used to. I just don't have that anymore. And so with all of that, I think whatever sort of hints I had of imposter syndrome have sort of just floated away. Of course, there's doubts. There's like days where you're not sure, or you're not feeling great, or you didn't have a great day at work, or you wish you sort of handled that situation better. But it's not a debilitating feeling, because I think when you stop competing with others and you really orient yourself towards you kind of grow to love yourself a lot more in the process. And so even if you feel like you've messed up, you're not punishing yourself for it. You're just giving yourself another chance and saying, okay, like next time, Larisa, don't do that. Like, do it this way.
This is beautiful. What I've been able to take from this is, one, you were really able to develop a lot of self-awareness throughout the years. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And then two, you're okay with not knowing, which is a prerequisite for growth mindset. So you know that I don't know this, but I can learn it. And you're confident that if you set your mind to something, you can do it, despite the fact that you might not know everything. And that's true.
Yeah.
Like we can't know everything in this world, and it's impossible to.
Definitely can't.
This is a very healthy way to shift your focus. And I think that's what I'm also trying to do. I'm struggling with that a bit, especially when you're working with people who are much, much more smarter, more experienced than you. It's really difficult not to feel imposter syndrome. And this feeling of like lacking, you don't really know. So I'm really also trying to make this shift towards it's okay not to know, and I can learn it. I can learn whatever I set my mind to. Yeah, that's very beautiful. And one thing you also mentioned a couple of times in this conversation is loving yourself, which I think is something that people feel like it's an egocentrical thing to do. What does it mean, love yourself? You're not supposed to think of it that way. But I want to bring this back into the conversation and remind people that it's really important to learn to love yourself the way you are, understanding who you are, having the self-awareness of who you are, where you stand in life at this point, and then always knowing that you are able to grow and change and evolve. And to me, that's the purpose of life, right? Growing, changing, evolving. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. I wanted to ask you a question that personally I would love to know more about. I told you before, I feel like you exude confidence. You're able to, I wouldn't say dominate the room, but you're able to have your place and be comfortable in your body as you speak. And I have this like visceral sense of, oh, I trust her, and visceral sense of she's competent. She knows what she's doing. As I look at you, your body language, the way you speak, the way you pronounce things, the way you articulate your ideas. Did you always have this confidence, or was this something you developed, and how did you develop this confidence?
It's a learned skill. I think anyone can learn how to do it. And there are people who come off confident, but they're really not, and you can definitely tell. For me, I had a bit of that myself, where I like really worked on myself and sort of developed the technicalities of confidence. But the shift really only happened when, again, like I really learned how to love myself. And I know I've said this before, and I'm sorry, but it's probably the most important leadership lesson that I've had over the years, is that you can't be a good team member, you can't be a good partner, you can't be a good mother, you can't be a good daughter or sister, a friend. Like, you literally can't do any of those things unless you really love yourself first. And I mean, as it's written in the Bible, I'm a Christian. I know this, we're going to be, we're doing this for the Armenian community also. And I think, people who think that's a silly thing to say, it's also part of, who we've been for thousands of years, is, Jesus taught us to do that. So, yeah. And I think theoretically, like, a lot of us understand that, but it's a feeling. It's not an intellectual concept. It's a feeling. And when I was able to feel that towards myself very late, I'd say, in life. I mean, I'm 35 now. This is probably like the last 5 years or so where I'm on this journey of like really liking who I am, and loving myself, and it's transformed completely the relationships I have, even with like people who I've been working with, let's say for 10 years. There's a difference for them too. And they're the first ones, and my family obviously are the first ones to tell me. I think intellectually I've understood this for many years, and you open up TikTok and self-love, self-care, like all these things, like big words, right, and big kind of core concepts right now of our culture, but it's a feeling. And once you feel it, that's when it sort of exudes out, and it's an energy, and it's something you don't have to talk about. It's something you don't have to like constantly persuade people you're doing or you're feeling. It's a feeling that you have within yourself, and no one can give it to you. No one can take it away from you. It's just how you feel about yourself. And so, yeah, I think leading, like being able to feel that and then leading with love is also really something that just has come very naturally to me. And it doesn't mean that I'm a pushover or soft or any of these things like I used to be. But you begin to love and respect others for who they are really, and what their flaws are and what their strengths are. So yeah, I mean, it's a process. It definitely does not happen overnight. It's definitely not something you can just write in your notebook or your diary and say like, okay, starting tomorrow, I'm going to love myself. It's a process, because it's tiny little actions that you have to take in that direction every single day. And it happens over time. And for some people, it happens quickly. And for some people, it's much longer. For some, it's a lifelong process. But as you go through it, it's a very enjoyable sort of thing. And it reflects and sort of spills over into everything that you do personally and professionally.
Mhm. That's beautiful. And would you say that loving yourself means you have to know yourself? And is this a learning process for you, taking those minor actions every day? Is it about self-awareness? Is it about learning who you are first? What was that about?
I don't think you can fully know yourself. I mean, I think it's a cyclical process and it's never ending. And as long as you know that you're in that cycle and you're curious and you're open to exploring who you are on a daily basis and being open to evolving, and maybe taking on to new shapes and forms, who knows, you know. I think, you know, it's again, it's not like a step-by-step kind of thing. It's not like you will fully know yourself and then you'll be able to love yourself. It's exploring who you are and learning how to love yourself through the process and through the various versions of you that will take shape over the course of your life. So yeah, it's exciting because you just don't know what that will look like, you know. And I think maybe as perfectionists or like type A personalities, which I am, it's like you want to control the outcome. You want to be able to articulate every single part of every step of, you know, self-development almost sort of like takes on to this like technical sort of format. It's not meant to do that, I think. And I mean, it has become that, and that's why I don't really love that world very much. But yeah, it's a flowing sort of process, and it's interesting, and it enables you to continuously be curious about who you are. But I think for people who are authentic with themselves through the process, like the core sort of key ingredients or like the common denominator is just always there of who you are and like what is important to you and what values you have. Like those are constants, you know, about how you, for example, orient towards people, or what you want out of your job, or what kind of partner you want to be, or what kind of mother you want to be. Like those are things that I think probably don't change. I mean, they haven't for me, but like the other layers I think can expand, and you're still who you are and always have been.
And you also mentioned that you have been a pushover, and it takes guts to admit that.
I've been many things. I've been very mean. I've been very nice. I've been like a micromanager. What else? I was, you know, burnt out and ruthless on some occasions. I didn't believe in the potential of people. Like I've been every version of like a bad leader, I think, that you possibly can be, for various reasons, both personally, like I was burnt, as I said, burnt out on multiple occasions. And when you have no kind of reserve to go back to get your energy from, then it's very hard to have all these like nice things about yourself. So yeah, I mean, I have team members who've been with me for 10 years, and they can tell you all the different versions of me. But I think the people who really know me know that ultimately I'm a good person. And I own up to my mistakes, and I know when I've messed up, and I ask for feedback. I really do. And sometimes obviously it's really hard to sort of accept some of the things that is being told to you. Sometimes you want to get defensive and you want to create an argument as to why you did this or the other thing. But ultimately, I think my team and the people who've helped shape me into the leader and like the person who I am today are also the people who've given me some really tough sort of feedback and have helped me improve and be better. And I have a lot of things that I'm still working on. We just did a end of year performance review, and my team gave me feedback, and I exactly know what I'm supposed to work on to be a better manager to them, to be a better CEO of the organization. So before I would just like beat myself up about it. It's like, why I do so much. It's like a victim mentality. I do so much. I try to raise all this money and all these things, and this is what I get. And now it's an opportunity for me to be even better. Like they're giving me this treasure chest of feedback of things that I'm doing well and things that I can improve on. And it's so great because I get to figure out a way to be a better version of who I am now.
That's amazing. And if you could go back to Larisa, who was just starting out to teach for Armenia, and you could go back and tell her one thing, what would that be?
I'd just tell her to trust the process more and to trust the universe more. If you're agnostic, trust, the process, I guess. I believe in a higher power. But I would intellectualize that part of who I am too. And, it's been amazing to allow myself to just experiment and like sort of ask for things from above, from the universe, from God, and have it just be like served to me. Before I was in this like victim sort of mentality of like, look at me, I'm this warrior who's like doing all these things and I'm so exhausted. I work 20 hours a day and I don't sleep a lot, and like also like in a very American kind of like way of talking about success and the hustle and like all of these different things. And so I've always felt like I'm swimming upstream. And that like, yes, I'm successful and ultimately I'm able to do these things for my career, for Teach for Armenia, but it's like so hard. Everything is so hard to get.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of, through this process this journey that I've been on that we've been discussing today, I've also just been more, optimistic about what I'm able to do, the people around me, and that there are good people who like want to help and doors will open. And even if something doesn't work out, just like trusting that, okay, then something better is supposed to work out, and just like really believing that has really transformed just like my everyday, even because I take so much more joy out of even the challenges. And I'm not afraid to just close my eyes and dream of a opportunity or of a person or of a grant or of a partnership that can, materialize for Teach for Armenia and take our work to the next level. So it's been amazing to see some of that happen. I think we're just scared to sort of think big and to dream big and to have crazy sort of like visions of who we are and what we could be and the sort of impact we can have on this world. I think I've thought small for a very long time for various reasons. And now I've sort of allowed myself to think very big. And I think it's already translating into a lot of the work that we're doing, the opportunities we're getting, the recognition we're getting at Teach for Armenia for the work that our team has done. And so, I don't live in fear anymore. Like I've always been really scared. I'm like, oh my gosh, what if this person doesn't give us funding? What if this, and there's obviously reasons why I felt this way, because yes, there were times when like we didn't have money and and it was really, really hard. It's like, it's kind of easy for me to maybe even go back and say, well, I should have, you are where you are and you experience where you experience. But I would just, to your question, it's a very long answer to your question, but I would just tell myself to trust whatever is happening, because so far, if I tell you like some of the stuff that's happened and some of the challenges we've had, running out of money, losing partnerships, feeling like all of the doors have closed on us. And then the things that have happened within like a matter of days, months, where the biggest thing, the biggest opportunity just like comes knocking on your door. That's when you know that's like, I mean, for me personally, that's when I know that we're, this work is sort of protected from above, or like we're being led in a spiritual way. And, I really believe in that process. And so I would just tell my younger self, just believe that things are going to work out, and that even the hardest days are probably windows to something really, really great and much better than you thought.
That's beautiful. I think you've really learned how to be in tune with yourself. I don't know whether it be your higher self or whatnot, but trusting yourself, trusting your gut, trusting the higher power, whatever, and just working hard is obviously in the mix. It always has to be, but
Yeah.
not exerting yourself to the extent that, oh, I need to work, because if I don't, then this bad thing will happen. It's the
Yeah.
opposite. I get to work on this. This is
I get
amazing.
to, yes.
And then I'm trusting the rest. And then whatever comes, and I will be open to opportunities. And I think you've really hit a very important note for entrepreneurs. We always have this very specific idea of how the journey should unfold and where we need to be within the year, 2 years, 3 years. And it's great, you need to have goals. But then this narrow-minded vision of, this is exactly how it should be, this is how the opportunity should come, really closes the door for rest of the opportunities, and then limits us, puts a cap on how things will turn out for ourselves, for our business, for whatever. And I think what you did is you shifted this mentality from, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to set goals, I'll do whatever it takes. I will also listen to myself and be open to opportunities that will come our way. So I think this is a very important lesson for all the entrepreneurs, not to narrow themselves and to put themselves in smaller things, because universe, God, or whatever people believe in has maybe a higher purpose for them, and they're just limiting themselves by
We're
putting
just
a
physics.
cap. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, it's so good you said that, because it just reminds me, and I've done this to myself too. You know those horses that like they put these like blinders on them so they don't look left and right. I think
Yeah.
then as entrepreneurs, we sort of get so stuck on like this idea of like what it should be, that even if like, you have all these like offers, opportunities, whatever, signals, signs, if you want to go in the spiritual direction, like all these things are being served to you, and you're like, nope, I'm not seeing it, I'm just going forward, right? I think I mean, I did that for sure. And it was only really when I took the blinders off and I was like, I ultimately know, for example, for Teach for Armenia, we have this long-term vision, and we have like a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan. We have all of this. But what we've worked a lot with the team on is having our OKRs, but then also, and having like a long-term vision, but then also just being agile and like adding in time to respond to opportunities, to events. I mean, working in Armenia, we've had like multiple wars in the last few years. Just that, even having the capacity to, yes, continue working on your KPIs, your objectives, whatever you call them, and responding and being a valuable asset to your country in a time of need. For example, in our case, we're leading one of the largest response efforts right now for forcibly displaced kids from Artsakh. We just partnered with the World Bank, and we're going to be scaling that project up to over 200 schools. So if we didn't have that agility within us and like a very solid plan of ultimately like where we want to be and what we want to be doing, how we get there, and allowing for that to change and shift from time to time, is so healthy and so important, because it enables you to be relevant in the moment and useful in the moment. I think it's also so healthy and important for organizations to really think about what they've done and how they've done it, and whether it's worked or not worked, and not be scared to kind of, you know, as my father, who grew up on a farm in Wisconsin, would say, you know, take it behind the shed and like shoot it, you know, like take your idea or your way of work and sort of like say, this can't be anymore because we're living in a different time and something has happened, or we have to adjust, we have to adapt. And, you know, of course, as a founder, it's scary because your ego is tied into it. It's like, you're the one who set the foundation. You're the one who wrote the original, let's say, values. You're the one who wrote the original plan. And then you have a brilliant team who sort of like dissects that and says, okay, in this point of time, like we need to do this next, we need to create a next iteration. And like, it's so important for people, especially those of us who've started, you know, organizations from the ground up, to be able to not just accept it, but just be part of the innovation, be part of like the new iteration, the new process, and the new version of whatever you've been working on. And often I've seen organizations, I think especially in the nonprofit sector, yeah, not be able to do that. They just do the same thing for like 20 or 30 years. And yes, of course, like any kind of philanthropy probably you know, has good things in it and might help in some way, but not reassessing, not adjusting, not innovating, not improving yourself, and like looking at what you're doing and being very critical of that every single year. Ultimately renders, I think, many organizations not very useful. So yeah, I think it's unfortunate that many, I think, nonprofits in Armenia are not doing that kind of thinking, but there are also some leading nonprofits that do that kind of thinking and do that kind of work, and you can definitely tell them apart right away. And I think they're setting a new standard for how philanthropy and impact work should look like in Armenia. And I'm just so happy that that's happening, because again, 10 years ago, I think it was a very new sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's what sets you apart from other nonprofits, is the fact that you operate as a startup. Despite the fact that you are a donor-funded organization, you still are a social entrepreneur. And I think we've had these debates before. I mean, people have these debates, but at Duke, I had a class on social entrepreneurship, and one of the case studies was Teach for America. And so it's very different way that you operate. It's not necessarily traditionally non-profit organization. So I wanted to ask you a bit about Teach for America, Teach for Armenia, and the fact that you are investing basically in education. And education is, well, it's so difficult to measure, right, the outcomes of whatever you're doing, the projects, because it's a long-term investment. How do you track the success of Teach for Armenia? Obviously, you have smaller projects, which you have specific KPIs in, but then overall, how do you track the impact of your work?
So Teach for Armenia started as a teacher fellowship program. Essentially, it's called the Teacher Leadership Development Program. And essentially, that comprises like the core program. And through that program, every year we recruit committed, passionate, smart, recent university graduates or young professionals. We've also, in the last few years, started recruiting existing teachers, so in-service teachers in our partner schools, to join the program too. But it's a program that essentially recruits, trains, places, and supports through a 2-year leadership development program these bright individuals who commit to 2 years of working in a partner school. Primarily, I mean, they're all outside of Yerevan, primarily in border communities or in mountainous areas. And, you know, we work with them throughout 2 years. There's a but they go through this 2-year program. Yeah, and we really prepare them not just to be great teachers, but also to be great community leaders and to be great alumni who are then throughout their careers working to impact and reform and transform the system, the educational system. And really amazing to see that just in 9 years, I mean, we're now recruiting our 10th cohort. So many of our alumni are in positions of like influence, whether it's a school principal or they're working at the regional government or they're working at the Ministry of Education in really important positions, you know, or they're working in corporations within the philanthropy division and making sure that public education, for example, or educational initiatives get funding from these corporations. So it's really awesome to see what the alumni and just in general, like what the 2-year program has sort of created for the system. And most importantly, it's a human capital resource. It's a movement of people who are very different, come from different walks of life, but have a really set shared like they have shared values and a really set idea of like what needs to happen in order for the system to be reformed so that it's accessible and equitable to all kids. In terms of impact, we are part of the Teach for All global network. We're the 36th partner, and now there's 60+ countries in the network. And Teach for All, that started with Teach for America, but now is all, you know, it has partners. It's not the same organization. It's not a global organization opening up their chapter in a country. It's all independent organizations. We're all sort of unified by this vision for equitable systems that enable the potential of all children, regardless of where they live and how much money their families make. But and the way we sort of, you know, live towards this mission and vision is through this 2-year program of recruiting these people to go into this work. Because of Teach for All and because of this 30-year learning sort of process that all of these organizations have been through, we have a very robust and globally, I guess, global standard, you know, framework for how we assess data, what our monitoring and evaluation frameworks look like, what we look for in terms of student achievement, what we need to look for to understand whether a teacher is a high performer or not a high performer. So that whole part has been developed in partnership with Teach for All, but has also been obviously contextualized into the Armenian, you know, context, system, etc. So the 2-year program is like a highly assessed and monitored program, and we work with 30,000 kids, so we have a lot of data, and we're constantly comparing and looking at it. And our practices are globally accepted and like reviewed. We participate in a yearly survey, for example, with this company called the Panorama. They do this thing called the Panorama Survey. It's in partnership with Teach for All again. It was developed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they assess like student engagement, for example. So we have like hard like student outcome data. We have student engagement data. We also participate in like this study within Teach for All called the Teach for All organizational efficiency study, where they compare like how much money we invest versus the kind of programmatic outcomes we get. We go through an audit every year with a top 4 auditing company. We're currently actually having the UCLA School of Education and the CREST Center at UCLA study the impact that our teachers are making in classrooms, obviously on student data and their engagement, comparative to like other teachers who are not part of the program. That study will complete soon in May. So there's a massive focus on data at Teach for Armenia, and it's been hard to operate in this context because Armenia did not until probably very recently prioritize data. We were just telling ourselves for decades that we have a very high literacy rate of like 99.8%. When in reality, you go into any school outside of Yerevan, or maybe even in Yerevan, and you look at the reading levels there, and you can just tell that it's not up to par. And I think we would need probably another hour to kind of discuss why that has happened. But we've set a new standard as a local Armenian nonprofit organization that is constantly not questioning, but like asking ourselves, we are asking ourselves, what is our impact? How do we improve our programs every single year? Not every 5 years, not every 10 years, but every single year. How do we improve? How do we get better student outcomes? How can we outperform our indicators? What do we need to do for our staff in order to be able to like contribute, obviously, to our kids performing better? Because all of that is tied, right? You can't have a disengaged staff and really high indicators in your classrooms. So, we do a big survey with the Boston Consulting Group every year where they assess our staff engagement. Anyway, so data is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I want us and Armenia in general to get to a place where we don't make decisions emotionally, we make them based on data. We don't say that this school is great just because they have chess, but because this school is great because we've assessed them on these parameters, and these are the kinds of results they're yielding. We're on our way. We still have a really long way to go, but it's looking promising. And I'm just glad that TFA is at the forefront of the data conversation for the education sector in Armenia.
That's amazing. And do you share that information with the Minister of Education
Yeah.
and help them also? Yeah, I think that's
yeah, that's a really big priority for us. I mean, we've always worked with the government. We've worked with the government since 2013. We signed our first memorandum of understanding with them in 2015. We did that because we were creating a program that would work in the system, in the public school system. And so, our first partnership was with the former administration. It was with Mr. Hovannisian, who essentially helped launch the organization. And subsequently, we've worked with every minister ever since then. I mean, the public-private partnership aspect of Teach for Armenia is very important to me. It always has been. And, we are a nonprofit, and we're able to be a lot more agile and innovative, and we can test and pilot and sort of assess the data much quicker than the Ministry of Education can, because they're the government, they're more constrained, they have way more things to think through. And so what the kind of partnership we've been in with them is testing, kind of looking at their reforms, seeing like what makes sense, and working with them to maybe improve some things, change some things, giving them like on the ground examples of like how this thing is working in practice, etc., and showing it through data, I think is the most important thing. This thing that we're doing with UCLA has been endorsed by the Ministry of Education, and they're very interested to see what our results will be, because it could have major impact on how teachers are recruited, developed, what kind of parameters are set for student achievement data, etc. So I really believe that one of our roles is to learn as fast as we can and accelerate the reform process and accelerate, us getting to a place where our kids can have a better education and just better outcomes.
Amazing. I think I would talk probably another hour about this.
Yeah, this is like my favorite topic, so we can continue for hours.
Exactly. But since we're constrained by time, I'll pivot a little bit and shift gears to something different. I want to talk about how you are able to balance your work life and your personal life. And obviously, I just found out that you have a baby, and that's definitely taking a lot of your time, I'm assuming. So how are you able to balance that without compromising any aspect of your life?
Well, I mean, I'm very lucky. I have a lot of help. My husband and I have a lot of help. My husband is an incredibly involved partner, father, so and I think, I'm very lucky because he understands the path I'm on and the legacy that I want to leave behind and the body of work I want to leave behind. And so, and I do the same for him. So I think we both kind of understand, why we need to do the things that we do and how we need to spend our time to get there. Leo this morning told me that he loves his dad number one and he loves me number two. So it might change tomorrow. He's a man of he's a little man of moods, but it's awesome to have a partner you can really rely on. I think the second thing also is obviously you're constrained with time, but like I've decided for myself that there are things, first of all, like I constantly think about my energy tank, and I have things that I know bring me energy. And I make time for them. Like it's in my calendar. And I have to work out. I didn't used to do this, by the way, but I have to work out in the morning. And sometimes that means that I need to ask for a meeting to be scheduled later, or I don't show up at a meeting. And thankfully I have an amazing team that can, sort of do this meeting without me. But like missing a workout is an exception for me at this point because what feeds and like nourishes me. I have to meditate. Sometimes I'm unable to do the second meditation of the day, but at least that morning one, I try not to skip because I know that it's a way for me to feel balanced and like way more in tune with myself. I have hours in the day where I just don't care, almost like, I mean, literally, I was talking to the head of this like major company and he asked if we could connect like an hour later, our scheduled time. And I said no, because I have to put my child to sleep because that feeds me. Like it gives me energy. It's like what I love to do. Especially after a long day of not seeing your kid, he's in kindergarten, you're at work, like the 6 to 8 to 9 p.m. window is really sacred for me. So I don't take calls. I protect my time with my child. And of course, like there are days when like you have to make an exception here or there, but it is truly an exception. Like on most days, this is what I'd like to do. And I do it. And of course, like, I wish I had more time to like see my friends or like, I don't know, go shopping and like do other things or just walk around the city because I love Yerevan and I love walking through the city. All these new things shops are opening up but you obviously have to kind of choose. And so I've chosen the things that are really, really important to me. Seeing my friends once a week on Friday evening, for example, very important to me. I don't have a ton of friends. I have a lot of acquaintances, but the people that I deeply love, I want to make time for because that gives me, it might sound selfish, but it gives me energy. So, and that whole thing could look very different for different people, some people like to be around a lot of people and that's how they get energy and that's totally fine. Some people, I don't know, like to cook and that's, therapeutic for them. So figure out what that is and just make time for it, put it into your calendar and just do it. Thankfully, my board chair, Sam Simonian, of the Tumo Center, founder of the Tumo Centers, told me, Larisa, you need to get into a habit of working out because there was a time when I wasn't. And you need to put it in your calendar. And it's like, I just don't have time. I have all these things I need to do, but he told me, he was like, it's like part of your job. It's like part of your job to be healthy. It's part of your job to be mentally well. I mean, I'm paraphrasing right now, but it's like, it's an investment in you because we need you to be healthy, happy, spiritually, mentally, physically. And for those of us who are very results oriented, at least allow yourself to have that shift where you choose to do things for yourself because that might be part of your job too. Even though it's not an email, it's not a meeting, it's not, a write-up, a document, but it's just equally as important.
Yeah. And I think you have really set the tone for how women should be approaching this, because our generation of my moms, for example, they never prioritize their health, their mental health, their physical health, or anything related to themselves. It was always about the kids and their well-being. And it's more often than not that women forget that their well-being is the most important thing for the kid. If they are mentally unwell, if they're exhausted, tired, they're not fulfilled, this will reflect on the child. And they will grow
Absolutely.
up seeing this mom who sacrifices her life for themselves, and this will give them a feeling of guilt. And I still
Absolutely.
feel that guilty that my parents gave up everything so that I could go to English classes, I could take dance classes. And it just is sad that the sacrifice, although it's beautiful, but that they were unable to really prioritize themselves and set example for their children. And I think
Yeah.
this is what you're doing is amazing, and that should be somewhat a mental shift for some mothers in Armenia as well.
Yeah. And it, you end up being, obviously you end up being in a vicious cycle of like victimhood, and then you become aggressive, and like, we all know Karpman's like triangle, etc. And you sort of rotate through these different roles, because you constantly feel like you're sacrificing. I used to feel like that. I was definitely in the vicious cycle of like with my team, like, in my personal relationships, it was always like, I'm the victim, look at me, I'm doing all these things. And so ultimately you become aggressive, you become resentful, like, it's just natural. I think when you sort of exit that whole cycle, you begin to, like, if you do something nice for someone else, it's not because you're expecting something in return, it's because it actually really makes you happy to like give a gift to someone, or it makes me so happy that I have this chance to spend, a few hours in the evening, for example, after work with my child. Like, I don't feel like I'm sacrificing anything. It's like everything is so much more joyful because it's such a blessing and it's such an opportunity, and there's so much gratitude in all of that. It's a mindset shift. And the good news is that you can practically, change your brain. You can rewire it to sort of exit that whole thing and perceive your life and the things that you're doing in a completely different way.
Thank you so much. I'm going to end on last question, which I ask all of our guests, which is, if you were stripped away from all of the successes and achievements that you had until today, what do you think you would be left with?
I think, I mean, ultimately, I would be left with just the people that I love, the relationships, the feelings. Yeah, it would just be gratitude for like the experiences that I've had and what they shaped me into, because that's something no one can take away. I mean, people can take away your title, people can take away your job, people can take away, things can happen, organizations can collapse, everything is possible. But what people can't take away from you is how you feel about yourself and who you are. So I would just be grateful for all the experiences and everything that's happened, and just be happy with what they've shaped me into, I guess.
Yeah, I think I was expecting exactly that answer, that what you have achieved with carving yourself, the characteristics that you were able to develop, the self-confidence, the ability to be agile and all of that, and that no one can take that away from you, despite if they take the business, if they take whatever achievements you had, the titles, that is something they can't take away from you. And that is also a prerequisite of building something different, something new, if you want to, if you have to. Larisa, I had the best time, and I'm really leaving this meeting with a dose of inspiration, and I I cannot thank you enough for this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your sacred time with us. I appreciate it, and I'm sure that this is going to be help to many, many Armenians and non-Armenians as well who are watching this.
I hope so too. Thank you so much. Thank you for creating this space. I think what you're doing with the podcast is really important. We talk a lot about success and, achievement and all these different things, but I think it's really important to understand that we're humans and we go through cycles and processes, and we have really great days and we have really bad days. And I think you've created a space in which people can comfortably talk about that and hopefully help someone who's listening. So thank you. And thank you to Nerses for creating this whole thing.
Thank you so much, Larisa.